Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this week's video, you have my next episode of Recent Reads. This is the spring break edition that does not include the weekend, or will not include the weekend, because that is Peace Talks for Realmathon. I have one book to talk about. I would have had two. The audiobook that I was listening to, I was literally like less than an hour actual runtime away from finishing it, and I listened at more than 2 times speed. Literally like 20 minutes before I was going to start listening to it last night to finish it up, it returned automatically to the library. I wasn't able to finish it via audiobook last night, and I hadn't even updated my spot on Storygraph, so I had to spend some time figuring that out. And I was at the point in the evening where I was going to be cross-stitching. I don't read physically while I'm doing that. I'm going to be finishing that one a little bit later, which it's going to end up being mixed media reading experience, etc. That just was mildly annoying. I'm like, really? You returned right now? You couldn't have returned an hour later. So the book that I did finish is Guardians of the Dawn, Zara, and I realized I've been reading a lot of Asian mythology lately because I had, you know, The Scarlet Alchemist and Descendant of the Crane last week. I don't know what it is about red books, people on the cover, and Asian inspired fantasy, but I've been reading a lot of them. First off, before I get into this book, I just have to say, this is one of my favorite editions. It looks like a light novel, which I love, and this is a romance novel that's talked about a lot in the book itself. And so because this is such a gorgeous book, I was so hoping that I would enjoy the book, and I did. In this book, you have Zara, who is a magician, and as is typical in a lot of these books, being a magician is looked down upon. It's frowned upon. It's basically illegal. She lives with her stepmother and her half-sister. At least I think that's supposed to be the relation. Maybe she's not related to her at all, but it was her stepmother. I think she was married to Zara's father, but Zara's father was also a magician and was killed. Zara is very close to her sister. Her stepmother is an awful, awful woman. She works for an apothecary shop owner, I think, to help keep them afloat. Her sister is blind, and she feels some guilt about that, but she tries to help her sister, but her stepmother, awful, the blood, actual biological mother of the sister. There's abuse in this, off page for all of it, but again, she's an awful woman. She's trying to make it so that they can leave, so that they can survive, basically, and she ends up encountering this person in the market, this student who she nicknames Plum Blossom for how he blushes. She gets what she calls the good-looking giggles, which it appears a few times throughout, and it's really funny. Some of these little moments, just little drops of hilarity, of humor throughout the novel, which I really loved. Well, it turns out, I mean, she doesn't know it for a very long time, but it turns out that the student is actually the crown prince. He's the heir. His father had been ruling, but when it was discovered that the royal consort had magic and was killed, he abdicated his throne for a regent, and his son is like the first heir. Now, unbeknownst to anyone else, his second son also has magic, and their lives start to weave together, and they're discovering this thing that they're calling the blight, where it's infecting certain people, and they end up turning into abominations, which are kind of creepy. But somehow, also, Zara can cure this, and she's like, I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand my magic. As I'm trying to explain the plot, I'm like, oh, this thing happened, then this thing happened, then this thing happened. It's almost like it's building on each other, but it's not necessarily that they had an end goal in mind when they started out. But I still really, really enjoyed it. I loved the way that the characters were building, the interactions between the different relationships that you see In there, of course, is there a love story between Zara and Han? Yes. I loved all of the character interactions and the way this was built up and the way that this ends. I'm excited that it's a series, and I haven't, again, put it through Compile. I need to do that sooner before I come on and do these reviews, but that might be a stumbling block to me getting out video portion. Who knows what I'm going to end up doing. But I think this is going to be, at the very least, a high 4, if not a 4.5. So I'm really excited about this one. Okay, so we have reached Wednesday, and I have 2 books to talk about. One I finished yesterday, one I got about halfway through, but I was not home yesterday in the evening, so let's talk about those books. First up, we have Paoa and the Soul Stealer. This is the book that I mentioned in the first update of this recent reads vlog, where I was 90% through the audiobook and it returned to the library, so I had to finish it physically, reading it physically. I am so glad that I had the audiobook for this, because the language and the names of all of these different things, they are not pronounced how we would think in English. So Paoa is Hmong, which is a people group in the Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia area. And I'm so thankful for the audiobook for pronouncing these different names, because there were several in here, like even in the 40 or 50 pages or so that I had to read, that I had left, I should say, where I was constantly referring back to the glossary, not to figure out what it was, but to pronounce it correctly in my head and to remember how it was pronounced in the audiobook. For this one, I would definitely recommend the audiobook. Now, this story, so Paoa is, like I said, she's Hmong. She has a younger brother and a single mom. They have recently moved away from their community after her dad just up and left the family. I have a feeling the way these things tend to go, that something is going to be revealed about why her dad left in the later books in the series. But as of this one, you don't know any of that. And she feels really isolated because ripped away from the community that she used to know, and also she's the only Asian girl at her school, and she's looked down upon. One of the other things that she knows is that her aunt is sort of a shaman, and her mom does some shaman-like things. They don't necessarily believe in the mythology and all of that, but Paoa can see spirits, can see all spirits. And she has this best friend spirit that's like a cat, and she's the only one that can see them. And her mom just sort of humors her, thinking it's her invisible friend. There's a reveal about this cat spirit where she found him when she was 4, and she named it Cat, but in the language it's me, pronounced me, and so it's a little awkward when you're listening in the audiobook, but you quickly get the hang of it. And he's snarky, sardonic. He reminds me a little bit of the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland, but only just a little bit. She is desperate to find friends. And this one girl, I think a newish girl to the school, like they're taking summer school classes, and she's taking 2 and her brother's taking 3. And so this newer girl starts to be nice to her and shows some interest and offers for her to come along with this new girl and the 2 other girls who don't like her at all to this old railroad bridge. And Paoa doesn't want to go because, like, even her mom said, don't go there. There's this really bad spirit. Don't go anywhere near there. But of course, she's desperate for friendship. So she goes along with them. And because of that, chaos ensues. Another character that comes along, who you don't know much about her background. You know a little bit. But she is a girl who is training at a shaman school. So my guess is we're going to get some insights into that in the subsequent books in the series. But the interaction between these characters is phenomenal. I love the way that Paoa is dealing with her own feelings of insufficiency in herself, taking on the idea that she was the reason why her dad left, even though that's probably totally not the case. but it's very heartwarming, and I definitely enjoyed this book. Next, we come to, I think this was my Buzzwordathon book for the month. I have to go back and remember the prompts. The reason I'm thinking it was my Buzzwordathon book because the prompt was supposed to have a character name in the title. So I chose My Lady Jane. Now, as far as Realmathon goes, I actually haven't put these through the Realmathon, the tracker, so I don't know how many points. This one, I know I won't get the school setting, but I will get the person on the cover. I won't get the cover color either for this one. But I will get page bonuses because this is over 400 pages, so I probably will get 20 page bonuses, but I'm not 100% sure. For this one, I don't get cover color, don't get school setting. I will get person on the cover, obviously, and I will get page count bonuses. Now, when I initially heard of this series, I think it was on an old some old videos from Haley and Bookland. I wasn't necessarily interested in it. This is not the type of cover that's going to draw me in. However, last January-ish, I read the first book in their new series. I think it's My Contrary Mary. I'm not 100% remembering the name of it. It was about Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. And I just loved that audiobook and the irreverent tone to history, the coming right out and saying, we are playing with history, we are not historically accurate, this is what we would have loved to have happened. And it was so much fun. When you are writing a historical novel and you're playing with things like that, I'm willing to go right along with it. When you try to write a historical novel and you take those liberties without saying that you're taking those liberties, that's when I have the problem with it. So after I read that other one and really enjoyed it, I decided to get this whole series. There's 3 of them. It's My Plain Jane and My Calamity Jane are the other 2 in this series. I obviously haven't read those yet. This one, the title character is Lady Jane Grey. I've read a lot in this era, and even the historical fiction that plays in this era and is historically accurate or whatever, I'm just not as interested in. However, this one I loved. Now, if you know anything about the story of Lady Jane Grey, it's a tragedy. She was basically co-opted for other people's gain. After the tragic early death of Edward VI, people in power wanted to keep the religion of the country to be Anglicism and not go back to the Catholicism of Queen Mary. There was a whole lot of stuff going on there. In this book, the battle, you could say, is not between Catholics and Protestants or Catholics and Anglicans. There wasn't all that much difference between them, but anyway, that's a minor off-topic point. But the battle is between Edains and Verities. So Edains are people who can change from human form to animal form. And Verities are ones that believe that they're an abomination. So obviously Bloody Mary is a Verity for Lady Jane Grey and her relationship with her husband. Everyone wants a better story for them. It's a tragedy. They were both manipulated. The way that history is manipulated in here, I just loved it. I had a fun, enjoyable read. Is it anything absolutely amazing? No, but I really, really enjoyed my time. I enjoyed how these authors played with history and made this a really enjoyable read, and I'm excited to read the other 2 in the series. I also love the fact that this is incredibly floppy. Okay, it is Friday. I'm back with another update. I'm probably going to do 2 updates today because I'm going to end this vlog here and do a separate one for Peace Talks, because I think I have 17 graphic novels and manga that I'm going to try to read over this weekend. That's a lot. Obviously, I will not be going into detail for every one of those, but the reason that I'm probably going to update again later today is because I have a few to talk about that I've read since Wednesday, since I last updated this, and it's Friday morning, and I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think during my run today, I'll be able to finish the audiobook that I'm listening to, and I hope to finish the physical book that I'm reading so that I can wrap those up and not carry them over to Peace Talks because they wouldn't count because I didn't start them during Peace Talks. All right, so let's talk about the 3 books that I read via audiobook. These are all short books, so they did not take me very long to read at all. So first we have A Burning by Megha Majumdar. This is not an easy book or a light book to read. As far as points go, I need to update my Realmathon points because I haven't done that since Sunday. So I have all of this week's books to talk about, and I have several to go over for this week. But so in A Burning, the inciting incident is a terrorist attack on a train in Calcutta, in India. You don't actually see any of those events. The characters involved were not on that train, but that is the incident that kicks things off. You have three characters that are the narrative characters, the point of view characters in here. The first is Jeevan. She is a young girl raised in the slums. She had an opportunity to get an education at a private school because she got a scholarship. The way that she gets involved with this is the fact that I think she witnessed it. She was nearby. The attack on this subway happened near her home or near her work, and she writes something on Facebook as a response, basically calling the police terrorists. And as soon as I saw that bit, I'm like, oh no, this is not going to go well. The second point of view character you have is connected to Jeevan. Her name is Lovely. She's a trans woman. She's an aspiring actress, and Jeevan had been tutoring her, had been helping her learn English. The third perspective is a man, I don't know his actual name, but he's called PT Sir. And he is the physical education teacher at the school that Jeevan attended. And his overall desire, or the thing that he gets wrapped up in, is becoming part of politics in the opposition party. And the way that this story is told, it is absolutely heartbreaking because Jeevan gets arrested on trumped up charges. Both PT Sir and Lovely end up testifying in the various court cases. You also find out about Jeevan's background because a reporter comes to the women's prison where Jeevan's being held on the pretense that he's her brother. And she tells her story, and she goes all the way back to her growing up years and how she ended up in the situation that she was. There's no happy ending in any of this. And the decisions that both Lovely, who has this opportunity to become a star, but has to distance herself from Jeevan, and PT Sir, who is rising in these political ranks, they make decisions that end up benefiting themselves and not Jeevan, who is desperately, desperately trying to fight against this injustice. And it also lays bare some of the religious tension in India between the majority Hindu who revere cows and the minority, but still very large number of Muslims who do eat beef. It's heartbreaking how this unfolds, and it's very, very well told. The other two books that I have to talk about are absolutely completely different than A Burning, but they're also very short. The next one is the book 5 in the Sisters Grimm series. This is the one that I wanted to get to for Realmathon because it is majority red, 51% red, and it has people on the cover. So that's why I read 2 of the Sisters Grimm books this month. I have 4 more to go, so I will be able to finish this series. In book 4, there was a lot of character growth for Sabrina, and I was hoping that she wouldn't have regressions back to how she used to be, like books 2 and 3 saw a little bit. Thankfully, we didn't. She was remembering throughout this book different things that she had learned. So this book, even though it does revolve around one particular case, there's some magic items that are going missing. It definitely significantly advances the macro plot while still solving this particular case. And I think they balanced it really well. It was interesting to see how Michael Buckley dealt with the thing that was created by the theft of these magical items, these time rifts, and how he used that both in solving the case and also in advancing the macro plot, I should say. And some of the reveals at the end, I will say, did not make a lot of sense as to who was actually part of the Red Hand, who is this overarching villain group, who's the one that initially put the Grimm sisters' parents into this magical sleep. They're trying to figure that out. There's some reveals, some twists and turns, which are like, oh no. It's at the middle grade level, which this book is. But I'm intrigued to pick up the remaining books in the series to see how things are solved in this book. So, in this series, I should say. So I realized I haven't talked about the bonus points. Obviously for this one, I'm not going to get people on the cover bonus, but I am going to get the color bonus. On this one, I'm going to get color and people. And I haven't talked about, I haven't figured out what the minor bonus points, but for both of these, I don't think I'm going to get any page number bonuses for all of these. I might get 10 if it was above 300, but I think that would count only for this one. And for this one, I'm going to get people on the cover and the color bonus. This is book 2, the conclusion in the Shadowbrucha duology, but also the Shadowbrucha duology is a carry-on to an initial trilogy that I can't remember the name of. It just has a different main character. Like Renata, was a side character in that earlier trilogy, and then J.C. Cervantes picks up, and she has her own series. And in this, what I find interesting is in the first trilogy, the main character there, his last name's Obispo, but I can't remember his first name. Anyway, he is a godborn who is of Mayan heritage. And in this, Renata is a godborn who has mixed Mayan and Aztec heritage. And the way that that was talked about and portrayed, and the battling of these different deity and mythological systems was really fascinating, and I really liked how Cervantes dealt with that. I will admit that I struggled a little bit more to remember the stuff that happened in the first book in this duology, even though it hasn't been that long since I read it. I read it in January of last year. And for some of these that I've read recently, like Heart of Flames, which was book 2, I think it had been longer since I read the first book. I struggled a little bit, but I was still able to remember enough pieces from that first book in the duology that I wasn't put off of this series. I found it really fascinating the way that Renata was dealing with the different powers that she had, and the way some of them were corrupted and some of them weren't, and how she was truly accessing her godborn powers in this, and how she was dealing with that mix of both the Mayan side and the Aztec side, and what that meant for her. I thought this was fascinating, and this was an excellent conclusion to the duology. Okay, so it is actually Sunday morning, and I've been saying all along that I was going to split this up into 2 vlogs. I don't know why I said that, because I should have remembered that there was no way that I was going to come along and update multiple times on Saturday and today, and it's very early Sunday morning. I will also say that. So I've decided to make this just one vlog and put up one video, and so there wasn't a video last Sunday, the previous Sunday. Totally okay. Not like I have a huge subscriber base or anything. I have 6 books to talk about because of that, because obviously it's Peace Talks. I am trying to read a lot, but I will say one of the reasons why I decided not to is because I didn't get through both of the books that I expected to get through on Friday, because I finished a cross-stitch project, decided to start a new one, and I knew the one I was going to start. I'd made some several years ago, and when I pulled out the papers that I had, the printed pattern that I had, it was a lot of papers, and I didn't have a lot of the details. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to get that picture again. I'm going to redo the pattern. And then I could not find the picture. I eventually found it, but I couldn't find it originally. Went back to my old computer, which we still have like tucked away in the laundry room. Pattern wasn't on the old computer. So I went down a rabbit hole of finding a new picture, a better picture, which has, I'm not going to say because I don't know if they watch or not, but anyway, found a better picture, went down the rabbit hole of making that pattern and then sorting out all the threads that I need for it. And even though I have stacks of containers for all my thread, still having to buy more thread, that took up a lot more time than I was expecting. So I didn't finish Magpie Murders. I'm going to end up finishing that next week because I didn't start it during Peace Talks, so I'm not going to read it this week. this weekend, I should say. So I set that aside. I did finish one audiobook that I was reading throughout the day that doesn't count for Peace Talks. And that is Hollowthorn, which is the sequel to Ravenfall. I do not have a physical copy of that. That was an audiobook read. It was also an ARC that I had. I read the first book in the series, Ravenfall, not last year, but the year before. The last year that Goodreads Choice Awards had middle grade books as, you know, one of their categories. I'm not optimistic for them bringing it back, but that's beside the point. I didn't really have any intention of continuing on in the series. Like, it was good. It's like, oh, okay. But then when I saw there was an ARC available for the next copy, for the next book, I should say, I was like, oh, okay, I'll go ahead and read that. I don't remember why I felt mid about the first book. I think it was that I was intrigued enough, but it didn't necessarily do anything original. The setup for this is you have this inn. The inn is called Ravenfall, and it's a sentient inn. There's magic involved, and the family in charge of taking care of it has different types of magic, and the main character really hasn't come into her magic in the first book. And there's a boy that ends up coming and staying with them in a somewhat tragic situation. His parents have recently-ish, past couple years or so, have passed away. His older brother has been taking care of him, but can't at that moment. And he thinks it's kind of weird. He ends up being somewhat magical and involved. And so he ends up staying at the house. And he is one of the main characters for the second book. In the second book, another character comes around and they go on this quest, which you can tell almost at the beginning that something is not right with this other guy, because one of the other characters in the book is Max, and he is a Jabberwocky, you know, from Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, and, well, through Looking Glass. But he takes the form of a cat in the normal realm, but he doesn't really like this guy that comes into the story, and they have history, and the main character, and I forget her name, she's trying to figure it out, but the Colin, the boy, he latches on to this new character because he wants to get this training in his new magical role. As part of that quest, other things unfold. It was a decent read. I could predict a lot of what was coming, and that wasn't a bad thing because this is a middle grade book, and some of that stuff has to be a little bit more obvious. It wasn't like, oh, blaring headlights of obviousness. It was like, I've read a lot of books, a lot more than most people in the target demographic, so I could figure it out. And it was a really strong read. I think it'll end up at about a 4-star, which is the same thing that I rated Ravenfall. So that was the last thing that I finished just prior to starting Peace Talks. Now, as far as Peace Talks go, I said originally 6, but there's actually 7. I don't remember, I haven't put these through the form, whatever, to figure out all the points, because Peace Talks are still ongoing, but I have 6 books to talk about. I have them in 2 categories. I have my stack of graphic novels, and then I have just one book here, but I have another one that I don't have a physical copy of yet, and I'm going to talk about those first. Those are the 2 books that I read via audiobook thus far. I have an audiobook copy of All Systems Red, and it's really short, so I think I'll be able to get that in as well today. Another thing that happened was I didn't end up reading as many graphic novels because I finished that project, have started my book genre blanket, and obviously I've read a lot more books than this. I haven't even finished with January yet, but I haven't crocheted in so long, like since my cousins were first born, and they're now in their mid to late 20s. Yeah. But I was able to pick it up fairly quickly, and I love the colors that I've chosen. So I think I'm almost done with January, but I have all of February and then all of the books that I'm reading this month. So I got a little distracted with that. But let's get back to the books. The first audiobook that I read completely during the time of Peace Talks is The Spirit Glass. This helps with 2 goals. One's ARCs, and the other is the Rick Riordan Presents project. Now, Roshni Chokshi is the author of this book, The Spirit Glass, and she was actually the first author to get a series in the Rick Riordan Presents imprint when it was brand new. This, however, is not a series. This is a brand new book. And I think Roshni Chokshi is of both Indian and Filipino descent. Yes, she is of both Indian and Filipino descent. Now, the Aru Shah series delves into Indian mythology. This delves into the Filipino side. And I thought this was absolutely phenomenal. I love this so much. So in this book, you have Corazon Lopez. She is about to turn 12 and she lives with her aunt. They don't necessarily have the best relationship because her aunt's kind of standoffish and kind of cool and not lovey-dovey and everything. And she doesn't live with her parents because 3 years earlier, they were both killed in a very tragic car accident. I think she was in the accident as well, but she didn't die, obviously. But one thing that is unusual about the whole situation is they are part of magic. She's going to be a babailon, which is something in Filipino culture, but she hasn't come into her magic. But she has this companion character who I think his name is Samson, but he doesn't go by Samson. I forget his nickname. But he's sort of like basically like a companion animal that goes along with him, and no one else can really see him or hear him talk. Like they can see him, but they can't hear him talk. And he is absolutely hilarious. I love his character so much. I wish I could describe him. Well, he's like grandiose speaking and talking and like, but he's not all this. He's like full of bluff and bluster and just so funny. But she also has this soul key, which she believes that her mom gave her. And because of this soul key, every Saturday evening they have family dinner, which means the ghosts of her parents can come back and become not quite fully corporeal, but more so that she can interact with them. And she looks forward to it every week. But then, so her aunt is a gardener, but like a magical gardener, and she sells both at a regular market and then also a spirit market. Obviously, Corazon goes with her every week, and something goes wrong on this one particular week, and a ghost gets a hold of one of her hairs and is able to come back and steals the soul key, which is not great. So now she has to go on a quest to make a new key or something for the ghost and get her soul key back. And this whole thing starts to evolve, and it really gets into her accessing the grief that she has for losing her parents and trying to move on, move past it. And it's so heartwarming. You've got the adorable side character. You've got another ghost that comes along and helps them, who is involved in the story. And you figure out more later. And it's a complete story all wrapped up in itself. And you don't often see that in middle grade, especially middle grade fantasy. I highly recommend this one. It might get to a 5 stars. A tentative 5 stars at the very least. It's going to be a very high 4.5 stars. Now, the other book that I read via audiobook is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherland, which is book 2 in the Emily Wilde series. And I read the first book. I purchased it last year and didn't get around to actually reading it until the Goodreads Choice Awards came around because it was on the fantasy list, and I loved it. I thought it was adorable. I think it was a very high 4 stars. And so I think by the time I actually read it, I'd already requested and received the ARC copy for the second book in the series. So I had that on the back burner and was sort of looking forward to it. Seen some reviews from some people who also got access to ARC copies of Map of the Otherlands, the second book, and were slightly disappointed by it. I don't think I was quite in the camp of being disappointed by it, but it is not the same book as Encyclopedia of Fairies. In Encyclopedia of Fairies, you have a lot in the book where she is very much enmeshed in the academic side of things, in the academic rivalry with Wendell Bambleby, the love interest basically. The way that the plot unfolds at the end of the first book, she can't really go fully back to being completely academic and just doing her investigations, excursions, or whatever to find out, expeditions I should say, to find out more about fairy. She can't really go back to that. Map of the Otherlands is a continuation. It's definitely the same series. She's definitely the same character growing and learning and changing, but it's not the same book because it really can't be with how the plot moved. And I thought this one was really fantastic, but I will say the plot in Encyclopedia of Fairies is much slower than Map of the Otherlands. In Map of the Otherlands, it gets going almost right away. And you have a few other characters brought in, which I thought did the story good. You have the head of their department, whose last name is Rose. She refers to him the whole time as Rose by his last name. I totally get that. But mentally, I'm always thinking Rose as in like some other female character, and they're like, no, that's her colleague. That's her boss, basically her supervisor. And then also her niece. And her niece, Ariadne, is also studying Dryadology, or the study of fairies. I realize I haven't given any bit of a background. But anyway, her brother, who is like 12 years her senior, he doesn't want anything to do with this. So the fact that his niece is following in Emily's footsteps, he's not all that happy about. Just a little bit of recap, which I should have given at the beginning, but the whole thing about Emily Wilde is she lives in like an alternative London and alternative UK area where the study of fairies is a legitimate academic pursuit. They actually exist. That's the background that you need to know. In this one, they are still trying to help Wendell. They go to a new area. They go to Austria, I believe, and they're still out in the countryside-ish area. And they're still out in the countryside-ish area, which lends to more interactions with the fairy, but it is very fast moving, and she definitely gets way more involved in a lot of fairy things a lot sooner. And I enjoy my read. Is it outstanding? Is it something that's going to stay with me long term, I should say? No. So I think it's going to end up being a 4-star read when I put it through Compile. Now, as far as the graphic novels go, I'm not going to talk a long time about each of these because I still have a stack out on my desk over there. So I've been alternating. I'll read one graphic novel and then do 2 rows of my genre blanket to try to get caught up. I'm not going to get caught up this weekend. But anyway, I'm reading through them very quickly. And I have to say, out of all of the books that I chose for this weekend, the first one that I chose is still hands down my favorite, and this is definitely a 5 stars, and that is Buzzing. So in Buzzing, you have a middle schooler who suffers from OCD, and he has all these different intrusive thoughts, and they're represented as bees. The bees are saying little things depending on what's going on, and he wants to, like, his mom is really trying to help him, and is following on with what a certain doctor that they've been going to has said, which I don't really like that doctor. I mean, that doctor never shows up. She tries to limit all of these other things, tries to limit his imagination and other things like that. But he ends up making friends, and they invite him. They see him do, like, he loves to draw, and then they see him doodling this dragon, and they invite him to a D&D type game. Obviously, he's not going to use actually Dungeons and Dragons, that sort of role-playing game. One of the things that you notice is that all the intrusive thoughts, they don't go away completely. They're not going to go away completely, but they dampen down, they lessen, and it's an interesting exploration of that throughout there. And he also has this older sister who is an overachiever, and she feels hurt by the whole situation because her mom spends so much focus on him and not her. There's the relationship with his mom. There's him building friendships, possibly a little romantic interest. And this was just so heartwarming. I loved this book so much. The representation in here is phenomenal. The author also has OCD and learned how to deal with it, to cope with it through, D&D type things. And so it's its own voices as well. This is just phenomenal. I cannot wait to put it on the shelves in my classroom library. Then I went into one that was fun. I was not necessarily a huge fan of the art style. It's the whole exaggerated different features and stuff. And it's a thing. It's just not my favorite, but it's a fun, sort of rompy, cartoonish sort of story where things like the Bach Nest monsters and other cryptids like that are plays on actual cryptids that people talk about. It was just a fun romp. The fact that I read this right after reading this, I don't know what I'll end up rating it, but it's fine. The next one that I read is Shelley Frankenstein, and this is lower than a middle grade level. I would say that Buzzing for sure is middle grade, and the Bach Nest Monster is also, I would say, middle grade, like 6th grade-ish, so younger. And I think this is more upper elementary school age and what it would appeal towards. But in this, she's like the great-great-great-granddaughter of Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein. And there's a family history of creating these monsters, and, you know, like Frankenstein's monster and Bride of Frankenstein, they still exist with this family. And she wants to create these monsters like her ancestor. Her parents won't let her go to the graveyard, so she tries to do it with different stuffed animals. And she's really frustrated because all of her friends think, oh, these are adorable. And she's like, no, I want to create a real monster. And she does. It frightens everybody, and then she learns about fear itself. Fun, heartwarming. Will I probably keep it on my shelves? Yes, but I think it's a little bit lower than the demographic that I'm going to be interacting with. Then we have one that it was interesting, and I think it's more of the style of a lot of different animes and things. It's not manga. It's not manga, manhwa, any of those. I didn't necessarily vibe with it like I thought I would, and that is Atana and the Firebird. And I don't know why I didn't catch at first that the Atana is a mermaid. That's a big part of this, and Atana has been banished because there's a prophecy that says she'll bring down the whole mermaid empire or whatever. But there are 3 sources of magic. There's the Firebirds, there's merfolk, and there's also witches. The Firebird, Ren, I think is her name, she comes down, she wants to explore. She's run away from her flock. They get involved in a whole bunch of different things. There's another witch character that becomes involved. And this is a series. I can see where it's going. It was a decent read, but it wasn't necessarily a type of story that appealed to me long term. It was a fine read. I got some points for it. It wasn't as enjoyable as I thought it might be. So now I'm going to go read some more graphic novels. Technically, I have already read one this morning, but I wanted to sort of go in order of the different days, and also this was going to be a long update. I don't know how many more I'll read today, but I plan to read several. Okay, I'm back with the last update. Peace Talks has not quite ended, but I need to wrap up the last of my filming because if I don't get things finished, edited, scheduled, etc., it's not going to happen on time. And going back to school tomorrow, back to work. I did not get through all of the graphic novels and manga that I had thought I was going to. I don't know who I thought I was, because like, I love to read, but I cannot read 24/7. I could never do a like only read for 24 hours. I definitely did a lot of other things, got distracted, etc. This is the stack that I had available still to read but did not get to. And yes, that does include all of my Spy Family, so maybe I won't binge it, maybe I will spread it out, and that will be totally okay. I'll be doing other readathons that I can save that for. I was going to read The Prince and the Dressmaker next, but it just was bigger and I just kind of ran out of time on the day. So at the moment, I will admit that I have not quite finished All Systems Red. I started this on my run, and 2 days a week I run just a mile to keep up with my run streak. I'm about halfway through, and this is a very short book. I have only about 40 minutes left at the speed at which I listen to it, and I'm really, really enjoying this. I'm gonna get this finished by the time that Peace Talks ends. I just haven't finished it yet, and I need to get this vlog, recent reads, wrapped up and finished. So that leaves 3 books that I have finished, 3 graphic novels. And like I thought, I read my favorite first. Which, like, it's not disappointing, but at the same time, it's like, oh man, it all has to live up to that. Now, I did read my second favorite in this grouping, but I'll get to that. The first one that I read today is Things in the Basement by Ben Hackey. This is the second book of his that I have read. He has another series. It's a Jack and the Beanstalk inspired one that I really, really loved. And this one is adorable. The setup is you've got Milo and his mom and his new twin siblings who have just moved into a new place. I don't know if there's a dad in the picture or not, because the dad's not in the graphic novels. His mom at one point asks him to go get his sister's sock, because it's, you know, come off, they're newborns, and she says it's down in the basement by the laundry. I was like, oh, I have to go into a basement. But he goes into the basement and he sees a rat with the sock in his mouth, and he's trying to catch after it, but it leads him down into this like underworld, this whole level after level after level in the basement, and he encounters some things that seem kind of creepy, but they come adorable, like a skull who ends up with like a cloak on there, and this giant eyeball with tentacles. You would not think that that could be adorable, and at first he's creeped out by it, but then it becomes his friend, and so he's all in search of getting this sock back, and a whole lot of things happen throughout this. It's heartwarming, it's sweet. I really appreciate the way that Hackey tells this story. And at the end, when he finally returns the sock, his mom is all like, oh, I was so worried about you. Thanks for getting this back. And hey, can I ask you one more favor? Can you get such and such out of the attic? And you see the face, and he's just kind of like, oh no, what does the attic hold in store in this house? So it was really sweet. And I'm going to go out of order so that I can end on a positive note. The last book that I read physically is the second most recent of my comic subscription. It's the one that is hardback. I should have taken the cover off. I didn't expect to, because there's actually artwork on the hardback, and this one was kind of my least favorite out of the whole bunch. It's not bad, but it's very old school seeming in the way that it's writing. It's very simplistic, and it's got a lot more panel, like completely separate panels with individualized text than you see in a lot of other graphic novels. So maybe this is more for beginner readers. And there's a level of absurdism in here, because Kay is just trying to do his best. Everyone in here has like alphabet, one letter names. He's just trying to do his best, and things will happen, and then the adults are completely unreasonable and won't listen to him when he's trying to explain what's happening. Also, it's not one coherent story throughout the whole book. There's like 3 or 4 different short stories in the book, and it was fine. Like, I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to keep it in my classroom library. It wasn't a hit out of the weekend. My second most favorite is a very, very well-beloved graphic novel, and that is Nimona. It has been turned into a Netflix adaptation. It is a National Book Award finalist. The setup here is you have Nimona. She goes to this guy here whose name has escaped me at this point, because he's this notorious villain, and she applies to be his sidekick. It's like, I'm not hiring sidekicks. But then she shows that she can shapeshift. She can shapeshift into just about anything. And she's a little wacky, a little off the cuff, a little unstable, and she's hilarious. And there's so much heart in this. And you wouldn't necessarily think that, because some of the earlier things are her just getting in trouble and going too far and etc. But then certain things start to get revealed about her that start to get revealed about her quote unquote boss, the villain, and the way that it leaves off, I'm just like, oh, I want so much more in this world. It is so well done. I loved the art style. The story felt complete, and it felt like the characters had depth. So the wins overall out of this graphic novel, Peace Talks, readathon for myself are these two. They are both phenomenal. This definitely coming of age, upper middle grade. It could probably get into the high school age. This, you know, they're probably about on the same age range. Upper middle grade, lower YA. I think people of all ages could enjoy Nimona, and I think that they have. The number of books that I read this week, a little unreasonable, because I don't even have 2 of them here. So Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherland, and I'm forgetting one of them. It was an arc. Oh, Hollowthorn. So I don't even have 2 of them here. And these are the books that I read during the week. I read 7 books between Monday and Friday. And then I read 10 books in 2 days. So yeah, I think I've gotten my reading mojo back. Let's see how long this continues. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.